Chapter 1. Location: Coos Bay, Oregon. Date: June 14th. Eleanor Agarwal. The last thing Ellie expected to find at the abandoned cabin she'd lived in as a child was a description of her death. She'd promised herself she'd stop running. She'd promised herself she was ready for the consequences of facing her fears. But this changed everything. "What is it?" Treadon Nelson asked from the doorway. He could always tell when she needed space, though she could sense his hesitation to leave her alone. Ever. His protective instinct came with any guardian's bonding to a descendant, but their bonding had been incomplete, and their connection felt strained, confusing sometimes. Ellie rolled the scroll she'd found on the floor among the ashes and dust and scattered debris of broken furniture without turning around. She tucked it in her pants, disguising the movement with a roll of her shoulders. It's hard to face the memories here. Ellie wasn't lying. She wiped at a tear. It's hard to see my home like this. He took a step, broken glass crunching under his feet. She turned toward him then, the dim light from the porch silhouetting his broad shoulders. His workouts with Gabriel Tuoer had changed his physique from a high school athlete to a warrior, but his insecurities still hung about his shoulders like a physical weight. He was so cautious, so worried about living up to the expectations of a guardian that he often waited too long, moved too slow. She wanted to give him the confidence he needed, but now, with the vision of her death, she was going to break his heart. "I'm sorry," Treadon said, looking around the living room. His gaze fell on the family pictures on the wall, the two happy children with a mother and father standing behind them, hands on their shoulders. "Did you find anything that helped you remember?" Ellie wanted to close her eyes against the memories. Her parents had been taken by the Triune when she was only 8 years old, and her brother taken to a place of safety while she had been left to fend for herself. It wasn't anyone's fault but her own. She'd accepted that, but it didn't fill the icy emptiness. She'd come here for answers, or for closure. She thought if she started from the beginning, she'd find a direction, and she had. It just wasn't the answer she'd wanted. They moved through the cabin, paralleling each other's motions, picking up discarded items, wiping dust from a windowsill. Ellie picked up the rumpled blanket from her bed, a quilt made from patches of her favorite things that had been sewn with love. She'd loved bats and squirrels as a kid, the wild parts of nature that had their own beauty and survival skills. Her mother had sewn it, and now it sat covered in dust, batting hanging out the front like an open wound. "Did this belong to your brother?" Treadon picked up a set of mechanical building blocks. "I wouldn't touch," but it was too late. A string pulled tight across the floor of the room and released a toy dart that hit Treadon square on the forehead. It was the kind with a suction cup on the end, and it stuck to his face with a squelch. Ellie couldn't keep the laugh in, and had to cover her mouth when he gave her a flat stare. "My brother loved complicated traps. I'm surprised that one still worked." "Nice." Treadon tossed the trigger back to the floor and pulled the dart from between his eyes. "I think I'd like him. Has Gabe told you any more about him?" "I haven't pushed the subject," Ellie said, though she wasn't being completely honest. She asked Gabe about her brother and where he was, but Gabe only explained that he was in a safe place, and until Ellie decided she wanted to leave, he couldn't tell her the location. It would compromise the safety of others as well. Ellie felt desperate to see her brother, but she'd wanted to get her foster family settled and find some answers about the Triune and her future. She wasn't ready to go back into hiding, and now she wasn't ready to bond with Treadon as much as she wanted it. Ellie looked around the room that seemed so much smaller than she remembered. "My parents chose to leave the Vale, to fight against the Triune. I hoped coming here would provide some answers, some clue as how we can fight back and find the Unguarded who have already been taken." Treadon moved around the bed and reached for her hands. She let him take them, but she kept her arms stiff, not inviting him in to wrap his arms around her waist. "Keeping you away from the Triune is the best way to stop them. They wanted what you had inside you, and they didn't get it. Hiding didn't work so well for me before." She regretted the bitterness to her voice. She softened her tone and turned her palms so that their fingers intertwined. "If Caden Bachman wanted to find me again, he didn't have to wait 6 months. Something's changed, and I need to know what. We need to face the future with as much information as possible." "I know." Treadon sighed. He stepped back like he could sense her hesitation. Her fear that if she let herself lean into him, he would feel the scroll. She didn't have the strength to argue with him about her decision. "Let's check the next room." The front door slammed open. Gabriel Tuoer followed Abigail Nelson and Rachel Sampaio through the door. "I thought you were going to stay outside and watch for problems." Ellie pulled on her shirt, making sure it hung loose about her waist. "We found some," Rachel said calmly. Her dark hair was pulled up into a ponytail and she wore biking leathers. She had become a part of the family after Jarren left. Sometimes Ellie felt like Rachel fit in better than she did. "Fenris are surrounding the cabin. The forest is crawling with them." "Can we make it to the car?" Treadon asked. Retreat was his first choice. He wanted to keep her safe. He wanted to keep the final dagger from falling into the hands of the Triune. She ran her fingers along her forearms. Her skin was scarred from wrist to elbow, where the white dagger had been pulled from her right arm. Her left arm had matching scars, but Treadon had stopped Jarren's dad before he'd gotten the black dagger from her bones. Now she knew from the scroll that if the black dagger had been removed, she'd be dead. She was connected with the daggers, and as soon as they were pulled from her body, her life would be over, and her guardian's life as well. Adura had seen her death in a vision, but Treadon wasn't in them. Treadon wasn't her full guardian yet, and if she kept it that way, if she didn't complete the bond with Treadon, he wouldn't die with her. "They're coming in too fast," Gabe said. "We'll have to hold them off from here." "What if we bonded?" Treadon's fingers curled into fists. "Would we create another pulse to stop the Fenris?" Ellie glanced up at Treadon. Their eyes met, and she shook her head. Pain flashed across his face. The doubt about how she felt. She wished she could ease the pain. Let him know that he wasn't the problem. He would walk through hell and back if he thought it would keep her safe. "We can't know what will happen with the completion of an incomplete bond," Gabe said. "There may be no pulse, or it could be magnified. We won't know until it happens. But both of you need to be ready." Gabe had seen the small shake of her head. They both had to choose this time, and Ellie wasn't willing to do that to Treadon, not even if it meant running again. The growls of the Fenris pierced through the walls and made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She tried to fight the shiver that worked its way through her body as the memories of the last time she'd fought the demon hounds flashed through her mind. "We'll fight." Abigail moved to stand next to the living room window. Rachel pulled the whip from her belt and moved to the kitchen. Treadon's jaw worked as he opened his fists and rubbed his palms on his pants. He wanted to bond with her right now, and she wasn't explaining anything to him. "I'm sorry." Ellie turned away so she didn't have to look at his face, and so he couldn't analyze her expression. Gabe handed Treadon a sword. "Keep them from coming through the front door. If we keep the entrances blocked, we can take them down one at a time, even if it takes all night. They aren't taking us by surprise this time." Treadon nodded. Abigail brushed the hair back from her forehead, her fingers tracing along the scar that had been given to her by a Fenris 10 years ago in this very room when they'd come for Ellie, and Ellie ran. That's when the voice sounded, loud enough to shake the glass panes in the window. "Come out!" The thunder of the words made Ellie want to cover her ears. Caden Bachman was here, the man who had the answers. The man who wanted the dagger from her arm. "It's time to stop running. Everything has been set in motion, and you have the final key." Ellie stiffened. Her arm ached like her bones were grinding together. She was going to die one way or the other. Adura had seen her death in a vision. She hadn't thought her moment would come so soon. But no one else had to die with her. She picked up the quilt from her bed, hugging it to her chest for comfort. "It's me they want. The rest of you don't have to do this." Treadon grabbed her arm. "No." Rachel let her whip uncurl, the end slapping against the floor. "We'll fight them off. We still have a chance." "Not with so many." Ellie pushed Treadon's fingers off. "I don't want you to die for me. My life is not worth more than any of yours." "There may be another way." Gabe held his sword by his side, his shoulders hunched. "No." Abigail moved toward the door, like she could stop Gabe from opening it, even though she was not half his size. "Rachel's right. We can fight to the end, and that's better than giving up before we've started." "He doesn't want you," Ellie said. "He wants me." "Caden Bachman is a businessman," Gabe said. He set his hand on Abigail's shoulder gently, but firm enough that she had to step to the side. "He likes a good deal. Let me see if I can bargain with him." "Don't do it," Abigail whispered. "It's a trap." Gabe raised his eyebrows. "It's our only chance." He set his sword on the floor. "You're not taking any weapons?" Rachel asked. "No." Gabe opened the front door. "Some battles are better fought with words." He walked out onto the porch and slammed the door behind him, shutting them inside. The air pressed from Ellie's lungs. She knew she should stop him, not let the man risk himself for her. But he was right. Either he stopped them, or they would all be taken. And the truth was, she wasn't ready to die. Not yet.